Okay, good afternoon everybody. My name is Oriol. I come from Barcelona. I'm a developer at the CPANTester team back in Barcelona. I'm relatively young when it comes to Perl. I know that there's people around that have been doing Perl for more than 20 years. I've only been around more or less 4. And regarding my spare time, I'm a little bit weird. I enjoy climbing walls. Okay, last year's YAPC was held in the beautiful city of Granada. It was about art and engineering. We had a great time, and if there's something we actually did have, that would be tapas. I mean, seriously, we had a lot of tapas. But if there's one moment I kind of remember fondly from that YAPC, without any kind of doubt, it would be this very one, which is when Ovid showed us this picture, Ovid showed up, pointed this picture at us, and said, guys, this is what we're good at, stability, reliability. And well, actually he did that again this morning, so. And the question I have for you guys is, how do you actually get something to be battle tested? And that's exactly what I wanted to discuss with you today. And so what's on the menu? First of all, I wanted to walk through 2 different scenarios that may lead to 2 different issues with dependencies. Namely, number 1, what happens when I depend on something and that something has a bug. And number 2, what happens when I depend on something and suddenly that something is gone. After that, I wanted to very briefly walk you through tools that are at your disposal in the Perl environment to manage dependencies. And finally, I also wanted to show you what can you actively do to contribute work in order to make Perl more battle tested. So without further ado, let's begin. And let me begin by telling you a short story. It's called How I Ended Up Finding Myself Modifying the Source Code of Grafana. And a little bit context about that is one of the main things we do back home at CPANTester is we're a systems engineering company. And so what we do mainly is we design and implement platforms for our customers, and we also manage them and make sure that all their services are always up and running. And one of the things this inevitably leads to is monitoring. And with the performance data that we get from monitoring, we do various things. One of them is we make reports so our customers can see in facts how their platforms are doing. And I mean, I have a great amount of respect for my teammates, thank you, that do these reports. I know they put a lot of effort in them, and so I would never want them to have to do a lot of manual work. And so since most of this data is automatically retrievable, some of the sections of these reports are automatically crafted. And so when we're about to do this, what we have to do is go get performance data, graph it, and apply it to a report, just like this. And so when we were about to do this, given we had a Grafana lying around, which in case you don't know it, it's a tool that looks like this, and that it really eases making dashboards to visualize data, time series, metrics, and so on. And so since we had this lying around, we figured, why not just pulling the graphs straight from Grafana? And so I did this. I did a really, really light Grafana client for Perl, and that given a host and a metric and a slice of time would return you an already rendered graph as a PNG image. And it looked great. I was really excited about it. But the thing is, as soon as I started to ask for more complex metrics and for longer slices of time, that's what Grafana would return me, an empty graph. At the beginning, I really didn't understand what was going on, so I hopped on the Grafana source code. And what I found out is that there's a timeout. So if any graph took longer than I remember, well, 0.4 seconds, it would time out and return you an empty graph just like this one. And the worst part is that this timeout was hard-coded in the source code. It was not configurable. So I was like, oh, seriously. So what I did is I went on GitHub, I raised an issue asking the developers to maybe implement this issue or accept the patch. But, and I realized that there were a lot of people actually asking for the same, so that kind of got me excited again. But then the developers of Grafana said that there was no way they had an intention of doing such a thing. So what I did is I forked Grafana, I hopped on the source code again, I modified it to do what I wanted it to do, and after that, the only thing remaining to do would be building Grafana to get my .deb package. So I was already almost there. So the only thing I had to do, I went through the documentation of how to build Grafana, I went through all these steps, which was quite simple, at least until I got to this very single step. As soon as I wrote this in my terminal, I mean, literally the whole world exploded in front of my eyes. A lot of dependencies started to fail, and seriously, I mean, I really went through hell to get that package built. And so some conclusions I got from that, number 1 would be, I ended up spending far more time building that package than I actually spent adding value to the product, because I think it's not my responsibility, and I think, yeah, it was extremely frustrating, to be honest. I mean, once I did this, the last thing in the world I wanted to do was contribute a patch to Grafana, being honest. And then, you know, it also got me wondering, why did I never experience such a thing with Perl? I mean, I've installed far more dependencies with Perl than I have with NPM, yet, at least in my very own personal experience, with Perl, it just works. And so this image came back to my mind, and with it, the question, I mean, comparing my experience with one and the other, the question of how do you actually get something to be battle tested? And here's a hint for you guys, the word battle tested contains test. And in the Perl world, test inevitably leads to CPANTesters, and that's a project that I wanted to talk about. So CPANTesters project is born with the goal of testing as many distributions on CPAN as possible, on as many Perl versions as possible, and on as many platforms as possible. It was initially created by Graham Barr and Chris Nandor, and it's currently being led by Doug Bell, Reaction on CPAN from Chicago, who just took over from Barbie, who's been doing it for 10 years, which is pretty impressive, I think. So more specifically, when a module is uploaded to CPAN, what happens is that it's automatically tested in many different Perl versions and in many different in many different platforms. And in the event of any of the tests failing, the author gets notified. You can get an email that looks more or less like this. And seriously, I think I cannot stress enough how great I think this is. Because I really think this right here is the community, your community telling you as a developer, hey, your code has these errors, please go ahead and fix them. And so I really think it's a really very idiosyncratic element in the Perl community. I think it speaks a lot about the maturity of the community and its focus on stability. And at least as far as I know, there's no other language with a similar project going on. There's been 72 million tests reported already. And lately, I also wanted to say, I would say value it, because I think it's a really, really great initiative at your disposal as a member of this community. Okay, then as I also said, I wanted to also go through a second scenario, which is what happens when a dependency that you depend on suddenly is gone. So let's discuss left path. But actually, not this left path, but this left path. In case any of you folks didn't know, David Golden went ahead and uploaded a left path module to CPAN. And now, what I wanted to do now is a big exercise of imagination. I know it's a long shot, but I wanted you guys to imagine what would happen if David Golden went ahead and removed left path from CPAN. What would then happen with all the downstream dependencies? Well, if that were to happen, it would be BackPan that would come to save the day, which, as you can read on the website, it's a complete history of CPAN. More specifically, any release ever uploaded to CPAN is available on BackPan. And I have great news for you guys, because if we go and check David Golden's at BackPan, there you are, there's left path. That's the URL, which maybe you could already see. And yes, you can remove stuff from BackPan, but in order to do so, you're required to have admin rights. So looks like left path is here to stay for us. Lastly, one note, which is BackPan, you can download distributions, starballs from it, but you cannot point, for instance, your Carton to BackPan, because it's an archive, not a mirror. Okay, then, as I also said, I wanted to slightly go through tools that are at your disposal to manage dependencies in Perl. Historically, there have been many choices for this, for instance, Pinto, but without any kind of doubt, at least my personal preference now would be Carton. And so, how do you manage dependencies in Carton? Really briefly. First of all, Carton is a distribution available at CPAN. It provides a command line tool, which is called Carton. And the way you would do it is, first of all, you would start declaring your dependencies using in a file called CPAN file. And you would do it like this. So if you depend on Moose, you would write it just like that. If you depend on a specific version of Moose, you could do this, which would mean I require at least 2.18 version of Moose. If you need it exactly 2.18, that's how you would do it. And then you can create more complex conditions and so on and so forth. And if you not only depend on Moose, but also on the DVX class, that's how you would do it. Once you're there, you just type Carton installed, and no surprises here. What that would do is install the dependencies. And not only that, but the interesting bit is that it would specify exactly which distributions it installed and which version of every single one of those distributions in a file called CPAN file snapshot. The idea behind this is that you can then version control this, distribute it between your team, and when anybody else goes Carton install with the deployment option, what Carton would do is install exactly the dependencies that are specified in the CPAN file snapshot and with the exact same versions. Now, as you might know, sometimes there are scenarios in which it's not desirable to depend on an external source, such as a server or a bunch of servers sitting somewhere on the internet. And in this situation, what you can do is you can use the bundle command of Carton, which what it would do is it would effectively bundle all the tarbles for your dependencies and leave them at a specific directory, which is vendor cache. And with that, that's how it would look. And with that, you could then go Carton install with the cached option. And what this would do is, instead of pulling the dependencies from CPAN, it would pull them from that directory. And interesting idea is combine them both. And so with the cached option and the deployment option, it would install exactly what's specified in the CPAN file snapshot, pulling it from that directory. Now, what about system packages? I mean, what happens if I have a dependency that requires OpenSSL, for instance? Okay, in that case, the installation process would obviously fail. I wouldn't see it as a limitation in Carton. I would say just way out of its scope. Now, I know that Sawyer, right here, is working on a project that will enable you to define dependencies in a declarative manner, just as you would with Carton, and also pull them up to the C level, among any other interesting and ambitious features. It's still in development process. It's not ready yet. And also, I wanted to mention Carmel, which is like a step further after Carton. It's also authored by Miyagawa, and at least in the documentation, it says that it's still experimental. Okay, that's about managing dependencies. And what I wanted to go through, as I said before, also is what can you actively do to contribute work to make Perl more battle tested. Now, before I mentioned that tests, that whenever a module is uploaded to CPAN, it gets automatically tested. That was not completely precise. I mean, yes, they are tested, but that's work contributed by people from the community. Actually, who in the room has ever reported a test to CPANTesters? Has anybody ever done that? Okay, okay. And actually, doing so is really, it's very, very easy and very, very simple, and it helps a lot. And so there's different approaches to this. That's what I wanted to tell you how to do it. And there's different approaches. One of them would be you continue installing your dependencies as you normally would, and you continue developing as you normally would, but when you do install a dependency, the tests that are run on that process get automatically sent to CPANTesters. And that might sound a little bit tricky, but really it's very, very simple. As you know, there are different flavors to install dependencies from CPAN, and for every one of these flavors, of these options, there are tools that will help you report your test results to CPANTesters. Now, for instance, if you wanted to configure your CPAN-2 all you had to do would be install app CPAN-reporter that will provide you a command line tool which is called CPAN-reporter. Run it with the setup option that will take you to a really simple first-step setup. And once that's something you just do once, and once you've done that, you would start dependencies installing dependencies as you normally would. And once you've installed your dependencies, you just go CPAN-reporter, and that will send the reports to CPANTesters for you. So really, it's very, very easy. And if you've never done that, I really invite you to trying it, because as you said, it's really, really simple, and yeah, it helps a lot. Now, if you do, here's a helpful URL for you that leads you to a log of the last 1,000 test reports that have been received at CPANTesters, and it more or less looks like this. If you ever check this URL, you will see that there's people that are all over the place there. I mean, for instance, Chris Williams, there's been 72 million reports, more or less, as of now. So 35 million of them have been done by Chris Williams, and Andreas Koenig have done a lot as well, and Slaven. So if you ever do report tests and you check this URL, you will have really trouble finding yourself in between all these reports. Okay, so as I said, this approach would be about reporting tests as you install dependencies. But maybe you want to go a little beyond that, and maybe you could just write a Perl script. You could use CPAN, meta CPAN client to start pulling recent dependencies from CPAN. And for each one of them, maybe you could rely on CPAN shell to install them. And if you've configured CPAN reporter, as I told you before how to do, just by doing so, the test will be automatically sent to CPAN reporters. And as you said, it's really, really simple. Now, maybe you want to go, if you really want to go like the extreme way, like pretty hardcore, the next step would be running what's called test smokers. In software testing area, test smoking is known as the practice of running tests in a fully automated manner without any help, without any human intervention at all. And there's modules that will help you do that. For instance, this one by David Golden, which is CPAN Reporter Smoker. If you install this and give it a look, it will do a lot of setup for you, and actually it will enable you to report tests by just typing one single command. Okay, that's all I wanted to tell you about. I think I went a little bit fast. And before finishing, I wanted to add just one little note, which is the title of the talk was supposed to be a mere joke. I really hope nobody felt offended by it. And if that was the case, please feel free to come by after the talk and let me know and shout at me or whatever you feel like. That's it. Thank you very much for your attention. And that's it. Thank you very much. Oh yeah, please. Sorry, yes, if anybody has a question, please feel free to. I mentioned that I went super fast, so I also skipped that.
Since we see the value of this in perl, and because a lot of us are, for example, using things that are ran in CPAN, or maybe we're using things that are running on Python, and full perspective in the Python community really want to get Python from CPAN. How would we, as people who are maybe not only using perl, able to help get this sort of testing environment and testing mentality to places like NPM and so desperately needed? Do you have any advice?
Okay, that's a tricky question. My personal point of view on that is that things like the CPANTesters happen in a community that's gone through a lot of problems, that's matured a lot. And I personally think, my personal opinion is that other communities are still going through many of those problems and are still learning through many of those experiences. So I really can't tell you how to implement such a thing like that in a community like Python.
Or a way to let them know, hey, both communities live in there, done that, know certain things, here's how we do it. And I think a lot of them would say, yes, we're interested if hey, we'd be able to share some of our expertise with, for example, Python is used by and I've had some stuff that kind of almost works working, but do they have to make sense for people in there that want something like that? Maybe if they had some help from, hey, folks have been there, done that, what it needs to be done with, for example, Python people need to, I mean, I wonder if it would be useful if people who are in that set up the smokers or CPAN workers or CPAN to say, like, say, are they competent to share this information? Because could the perl has it, but that's kind of sitting in perl.
That kind of references something that I think it's pretty idiosyncratic as well of the Perl community, which is sometimes we do really, really, really cool stuff, but we keep it for ourselves. And Ovid mentioned it today as well, and maybe we kind of communicate not that much the cool stuff that we do, but that's something that would help in that case as well, I think. Yep. I guess it requires time. Yeah. Any other question?
Not really a question, but you said you weren't aware of any other language having anything like CPANTesters. It's not quite the same
Mm-hmm.
in Haskell, if it compiles, it also means something.
Yep, definitely.
If
Yeah.
it's not type system. So that's something a bit like that.
And you mentioned the name of that project is?
I forgot what it's called, but I don't know.
Okay, I will give it a look. Haven't heard of that. Thank you. Okay, any other question? Okay, so thank you very much for your time and your attention, guys.